Hey everyone, I think we're live, and so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, my name is Fernando Cordova. I'm one of the coordinators for Theology on Tap here in the Monroe area of the Diocese of Shreveport. What I want to do today is to describe where Halloween comes from, since we have Halloween here in a few days. And I also want to hopefully clear up some misinformation that's about Halloween and some myths that are out there in relation to the celebration. See, some claim that Halloween is an attempt by the early Christians to baptize the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. They may say that this pre Christian festival was celebrated among the Celtic Druids that escaped church suppression. Even today, modern pagans and witches continue to celebrate this ancient festival. And if you let your kids go trick or treating, they'll be worshiping the devil and pagan gods. So, as a result, today, many modern Christians have some hesitation to participate or celebrate anything associated with Halloween. But like many other claims, this myth is also based on bad research and propaganda that primarily developed after the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. So, what's the real story? Well, since the beginning of Christianity, it's been customary to practice, to solemnize, to memorialize the anniversary of a Christian martyr's death. This was normally done at the church nearest to the place where the martyrdom occurred. By the 4th century, neighboring churches had begun to celebrate common feasts. And so, in the early 8th century, during the reign of Pope Gregory III, Pope Gregory decided to consecrate a chapel in the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome to all the saints and fixed the anniversary for November 1st. Although this date had become significant for the Christians in the West, mainly in Rome and the surrounding area, it was not yet a universally recognized feast day. That is until 835, when Pope Gregory IV decreed that the Feast of All Saints be observed annually on the 1st of November. And so, Halloween falls on October 31st because it is the vigil before All Saints' Day. But why do we call it Halloween? Well, if you take the first part of Halloween, it's the word hallow. Hallow comes from the same root as holy. And a person who is hallowed is a saint, someone who has been sanctified and made holy. As an example, in the Lord's Prayer that all Christians recognize and recite regularly, we say about God, about Father, hallowed be thy name. If we said that using words derived from Latin, it would be something like, let your name be sanctified. In other words, what we're saying is, may people treat God's name as something holy and thus honor the holiness of God himself. So a hallow is simply a saint, and All Hallows Day is the day where we celebrate all of the saints who are in heaven. What about Een, the second part of the word? Well, the Een part of Halloween is similarly old-fashioned. Een is a contraction of the word even. Even is an older way of saying evening. So Halloween is thus All Hallows Eon, or the evening of All Saints' Day, the evening preceding All Saints' Day. And so over time it became combined. And so now that's why we say Halloween. So the church did not baptize Samhain or any other pagan celebration when coming to the celebration of Halloween. You see, a lot of people may not know what Samhain is. Samhain was a festival that marked the beginning of winter in Ireland. The ancient Celts believed that the division between the lighter part of the year, that is summer, and the division between the darker part of the year, or winter, marked the point at which the division or the boundary between the living and the dead was at its weakest. And so the ancient Celts believed that this allowed spirits or spirits of the dead to pass through. But the historical evidence does not support the idea that this involved, let's say, jack-o'-lanterns, witchcraft, ghosts, or even religious ceremonies. In fact, in his book, Stations of the Sun, the historian Ronald Hutton explains, the medieval records furnish no evidence that November 1st was a major pan-Celtic festival. And no religious ceremonies took place as a result of this festival, even where it was observed. Now, Samhain is spelled Samhain, in case you're interested in researching this a little bit further. Now, you may also ask, well, where did we get the tradition of dressing up in costumes on Halloween? That certainly wasn't part of the early church. And you'd be correct. The tradition of dressing up in costumes on Halloween isn't really Irish at all. In fact, it actually has French origins. See, in the 14th and 15th centuries, late medieval Europe was hit by the bubonic plague, what we would know commonly as the Black Death. During this plague, Europe lost around half of its population. So it's not surprising that Catholics would become more concerned about the afterlife. So the church had, at this time, of course, feast for all those in heaven and all those in purgatory. So what about those in the other place, that is hell? And the Irish Catholic peasants especially wondered about all those souls in hell. After all, if the souls in hell are left out when we celebrate those in heaven and purgatory, they might be unhappy enough to cause trouble. Now, of course, this was superstition, but that's what they believed at the time. So it actually became customary to bang pots and pans on All Hallows Even, or Halloween, to let the damned know that they were not forgotten. And thus, in Ireland, at least, all the dead came to be remembered on Halloween. This is important as it relates to the French, Catholics especially, in the medieval times, because beginning in the year 998, specifically with a particular abbot known as Saint Odilo, who was an abbot of a powerful monastery in Cluny in southern France. Saint Odilo added a celebration on November 2nd. This celebration was a day of prayer for all the souls of the faithful departed. This feast, called All Souls' Day, spread from France to the rest of Europe. More masses were said on All Souls' Day, and, importantly, artistic representations were devised to remind everyone of their own mortality. We know these representations as the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death. Sometimes the dance was presented on All Souls' Day itself as a living tableau, with people dressed up in the garbs of various states of life. But it was just the French that dressed up on All Souls, not Halloween. And the Irish, who had Halloween by this time, did not dress up. So how did they come to the tradition that we know today, where we dress up in costumes? And used to be we dressed up in the costume of our favorite saint. Well, how the two probably became mingled was in the first British colonies of North America, during the 1700s, where we had a lot of Irish and French Catholic immigrants. And what happened was the Irish and the French Catholics began to intermarry. The Irish focus on hell, or on All Souls, gave the French masquerades, the artistic and events with costumes, an even more macabre twist. And eventually, the tradition of dressing up in costumes was moved from November 2nd to October 31st, since that is when the Irish had come to remember All Souls. So, of course, this tradition continues to this day, even if perhaps most people don't dress up as their favorite saint. Some Catholics still faithfully do this, and that's awesome because the saints shouldn't be strangers. Now, a few other things about Halloween that we come to know are closely associated with it. For example, trick-or-treating. Okay, so where did this come in? It's pretty odd, addition to Halloween. It didn't originate with the Irish either. It's actually the unwilling contribution of English Catholics. You see, during the penal period, from the 1500s to the 1700s, English Catholics had very, very little legal rights. They were subject to heavy fines, heavy taxes, and even prison time for very minor offenses and for the practice of their faith. In fact, it was a capital offense to say Mass. And sadly, this led to hundreds of priests being martyred. So occasionally, you could probably understand that some Catholics in Great Britain, were getting frustrated with this. And, some occasionally resisted, foolishly, sometimes. One of the foolish acts of resistance that we've come to know was a plot to blow up the Protestant King James I and his parliament with gunpowder. This was supposed to trigger a Catholic uprising against their oppressors. This ill-conceived gunpowder plot was foiled on November 5th, 1605, when the man guarding the gunpowder, a reckless convert named Guy Fawkes, was captured and arrested. He was hanged and the plot fizzled. Now, November 5th, that is, it came to be known as Guy Fawkes Day, it became a great celebration in England. And so it is to this day. During the penal periods, the band of revelers would put on masks and visit local Catholics in the dead of night, demanding beer and cakes for their celebration. You could say a trick or a treat. Now, Guy Fawkes Day eventually arrived in the American colonies that I mentioned earlier with the first English settlers. But by the time of the American Revolution, old King James and Guy Fawkes had pretty much been forgotten. Trick or treat, though, was too much fun to give up. So eventually, it moved to October 31st, the day of the Irish and French masquerade. And in America, trick or treat, of course, has not been limited to Catholics. So the mixture of various immigrant traditions, as we know as Halloween, had become a fixture in the United States by the 1800s. And to this day, it remains unknown in Europe, oddly enough. But it has, interestingly enough, been more common in Latin American countries. I'm a dual citizen of El Salvador and the United States. And interestingly enough, El Salvador has more people interested in celebrating Halloween. But the origins, the original countries from where it originated, I guess, those traditions have sadly fallen away. You may also ask, okay, well, a few other things associated with Halloween are the witchcraft, the occult practices, And, that's also an addition that came later on. It really originated in the 1800s as well, late 1800s, with, believe it or not, the greeting card industry. So since Halloween was already ghoulish, okay, and you had all sorts of creepy stuff associated with it, well, the industry said, why not add witchcraft to the mix, I guess you could say. And they started placing witches and things associated with witchcraft on the greeting cards. While that type of Halloween card style quickly died out, although every now and then, I think you may hear of a resurgence in popularity, the witches stayed and the witchcraft stuck. And so it became associated with the celebration of the holiday. What about the carving of pumpkins, or what we know as jack-o'-lanterns? So also in the 1800s, a lot of ill-informed folklorists thought that Halloween was Druidic, Celtic, and pagan in origin. And they thought that lamps made from turnips, actually, had been part of ancient Celtic harvest festivals. And so they were translated to the American Halloween celebration. However, the American settlers came to realize that pumpkins were a lot sturdier and served much better as lamps than turnips did. Why do we call the pumpkins with the service lamps that have some sort of light, used to be candles probably, why do we call them jack-o'-lanterns? Well, again, the English used to refer to the watchmen that had lanterns, of course, more so during the night watchmen. They used to refer to them as Jack, because if you were a traveler, or if you're traveling from town to town, you probably would not know the name of the night watchman who was watching the entry points for each town. And so they would refer to them as Jack, or Jack of the Lantern. Of course, this was shortened to jack-o'-lantern. And so eventually, creative English and what we know to be American today, creative folks would carve holes in the pumpkins in order to serve as lamps or lanterns. And as we know today, we not only carve holes in our pumpkins, but we make all sorts of artistic creations with them. And so that addition also stuck to this day. So I hope you've learned a few things about Halloween that maybe you didn't know before. And the next time someone claims that Halloween is a cruel trick to allure your children into devil or pagan worship, you may want to tell them about the real origin of All Hallows Eve, and invite them to discover its Christian significance, its Catholic significance, especially the two greater and more important Catholic feast days that follow it. So I wish you all a happy Halloween, a happy feast of All Saints, and a prayerful All Souls Day. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for watching, and I hope you liked this video. If you really, really did, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel as well. And share us on your social media platform, because that helps the channel grow, it helps spread Catholicism, and it helps evangelize perhaps some who don't know, let's say, the origins of Halloween. I'm Fernando Cordova, and I pray that you have a blessed day. God bless, and until next time.